Okay, let's try that again. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Gateway API meeting for November 7th, 2022. My name is Nick Young. I am moderating this one today. As always, this is a Kubernetes project meeting, and so all of the usual Kubernetes project code of conduct stuff applies. In summary, please be nice to each other. Okay. Before we get started, there's lots of people here. Does anyone want to say an intro or say hi to everybody? If you haven't said so before, completely optional, no problems if you don't want to. Just if you would like to say hi, we'll give you a few seconds to do so.
Yeah, hey everyone. My name's Andrew Stoikis. I work with Red Hat and have been working in Kube for a while, mostly on the network policy work. So SIG Network API, Network Policy API subgroup SIG Network on admin network policy. And I met up with Rob and Shane and others at KubeCon a week ago and kind of got pulled into some fun eBPF stuff. So learning more about Gateway and excited to see where I can help out.
Awesome. Nice to meet you. Anyone else want to say hi? Cool. Okay, let's hit the agenda then. Shane and Andrew, you are up first. I'll let you take it away.
Sure thing. All right, I need to screen share.
Do you want to take a host then?
Can you just give it to me? I think you can go into participants and like say, make this person co-host or something.
Yes, done. There we go. You are now co-host.
I think, okay, right now you should be able to just see the meeting notes. Everything good?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. All right, so a couple of weeks ago, and for those who are uninitiated, I brought up the idea of creating a implementation of Gateway API that was layer 4 only, that used eBPF as kind of the backend data plane. So that was probably 2-3 weeks ago, basically the week right before KubeCon. I brought it up in one of these meetings, and some of the reasons for doing this were for fun and because, you know, it was for a good time, but also included like building something that we could actually use as like a testing tool and a reference implementation for Gateway API that didn't have the tribal problem of being attached to technologies which were contentious. I'll say contentious. Basically, the Linux kernel and Gateway API, which is kind of the breadth of the technologies involved in this project, are not contentious to anybody here. So thus became Bleaks, which is Swedish for lightning. The flash of lightning is how I understand it. This is a fun name. And this is an experimental layer 4 Kubernetes Gateway API implementation that uses eBPF. It currently uses XDP, but we'll go into some details about like where it's headed and stuff like that and do a quick demo. So hopefully that was a good enough intro to like what it was for those who weren't here. And then for everybody else, you're caught up on like where we're at. Suffice to say, at KubeCon, we got a lot of traction. Andrew is here on my request because he and I have been basically pairing on this thing for the last couple of weeks and during KubeCon. It's been a lot of fun. It's also been a lot of struggles. Yeah, it's been a lot of struggling, but we do have it working, and so we have a real demo for you today. I apologize in advance. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get the font much bigger on this setup for you guys, but there's a lot that's going to be going on here. So in this window here, what I'm gonna be doing is showing the deployment of the control plane, which is in controller runtime and Go, using Gateway API, and the data plane, which in this demo is in Go and C, and we'll talk about why I say in this demo. In this window, we're just gonna have tracing output from our kernel. It's gonna be deployed inside of, I have a little Kind cluster here that's not doing a whole lot of anything. And then we'll trace the control plane and the data plane logs. And then what we'll show is a UDP route coming up and ultimately getting traffic into a pod. So today, this all works. You can customize in the repo and deploy all the little bits. So the data plane and the control plane, which came up fast because I downloaded all the images and everything beforehand. Ultimately, the data plane is currently run as a daemon set that will just load. Probably should have explained what eBPF is to some people, but I'm sorry, we're gonna have to gloss over
we
that
can
one a
do
little
it
bit.
after. We can do it after. We can kind of rewind, show it working, and then talk about
Yeah.
how it works.
The short version of what this is doing is this data plane is going it has host network access and privileged access, and it's loading code directly into the kernel. This is what eBPF does to take care of the routing. Basically, instead of doing it inside of like Nginx or Envoy or something like that, or even with IP tables. So you can kind of consider that like an alternative to like what Service does with IP tables, ultimately similar. But at the end of the day, it is a completely different construct, and it's a little bit closer to like a kernel module with custom code than it is IP tables, where you're giving like IP tables configurations and stuff like that. Hopefully that wasn't too hand wavy of an explanation, but that's what this thing is doing, is loading C code into the kernel that's like controlling like packet redirection for us. And then the controller manager is just listening for gateways and gateway classes and so forth. Okay, so once that's up, we have a couple of samples in here right now. You can do samples gateway. This just creates a basic gateway class, which the control plane said, yep, that's my controller name, so I'll take care of that and anything you attach to it. And then the gateway, which gets an IP address. And then we'll also in the cluster already, I have a Nginx pod, which is listening, has a service listening, load balancer type service listening here for UDP. Actually, I used Nginx just because it has apt, and I could just apt install netcat, so it's easy. So basically, this is an example of kind of using service type load balancer. Everything's working just as you'd expect. You see that our kernel actually caught track of the fact that we were doing it because we're doing a bunch of tracing right now. But ultimately, that is everything working outside of Blixt the traditional way. I have a service type load balancer where I hit the service IP and ultimately sent it a UDP packet and it got it. The gateway, on the other hand, currently is doing nothing. So the gateway in this example is actually backed by a service type load balancer, because that's just how these things work right now in Gateway API. But ultimately, you can see that this IP address over here ended up not having any backend. So this is our kernel code that is telling us, okay, well, I don't know where to send that, so it's dying. It's basically just kind of we're holding on to a service load balancer IP, but it's not doing anything. So what we're going to do is we'll take a look at a basic UDP route, which we're going to attach to port 9875 of our gateway named Blixt. Yep, and then the backend ref for it is that same Nginx pod with 9875. Oh, I meant to show, and then I didn't do it. Log/f. Meant to show the control plane. Ultimately, the control plane was logging under the hood that it's like the service is ready, so it updated the gateway, and you saw the gateway class was set as true. Bleak system logs-f data plane, and then this thing is just started up, and it has a UDP route controller in it because that's temporary for now. It's not always going to live there, but it did because it was easier for like getting this working. And then it's attached to the ETH0 of the Kind cluster.
Yep,
so
and
now,
you're actually seeing the logs for the eBPF program, that XUV program. That's what we're tailing over here on the right.
Yep, that was, like I said in the beginning there, that's the eBPF, like the actual C code doing debug statements that's coming out in the kernel debug trace. So anything you see on this window is us in our C code basically saying what we're doing with packets as we see them. So samples UDP route. So if we apply the UDP route, if I didn't break anything, okay, it created a backend, and this added all the information needed to like for that UDP route, and you'll see it's repeating. That's just because it's on a loop right now. This is all very toy right now. But it's on what it's doing is ultimately updating what's called an eBPF map. So that is just memory space in the kernel that's shared with user space. So the controller, which is in user space, is saying, all right, here's the configuration from UDP route, here's the gateway IP address, here's the port, and then feeding that into a place where the kernel code can pick it back up out of a map. And that's what's ultimately used then to make decisions about the routing. So that same thing that wasn't working before, where we're testing eBPF, if I didn't break anything, now we get it here, and we see that the eBPF, the XDP code is actually working, and we got a bunch of different outputs showing us like where we're sending it now. It has a backend now that it found in that map, so you can see that it's updated. It's got all the information it needs to redirect that packet off to the pod. And that's pretty much it. I can similarly delete the UDP route, and it'll remove it from the map, and so therefore we will no longer get traffic. However, the IP tables one still goes through, obviously, because that's a completely different networking path. So that's it. That's the thing that we said we would demo in a couple of weeks. It's working.
Nice.
It's working. And I think one of the cool bits we glossed over here is like the packet is being caught before the internal structure that Linux used to represent a packet is even made. That's called an SKSKB. So like it helps us make this implementation a bit more platform agnostic, because like even if there was an IP tables rule targeting this same service IP, it wouldn't touch it. Like you're catching that traffic and doing something with it way before. Obviously, if Cilium were to come and make like their own gateway implementation, you might run into some issues, but I think they're really the only ones doing eBPF and Cube at a large scale.
Nick is Cilium, by the way.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
sorry,
So,
Nick. No,
that's fine. That's fine.
But
So we actually do have a gateway implementation, but we don't have UDP route support yet. So I'm really glad to see you all doing this.
oh, interesting. Cool. So yeah, kind of cool.
Yeah, the XDP thing is definitely it's our packet, but one of the hardships that we ran into is everything is ours. So yeah, so I have a couple more notes just so I don't lose track of things. So that's the demo that we said we were going to do a couple weeks ago. We had a great time building and hacking on it at KubeCon. We have some goals that are in here right now. Basically, we want to support gateway and gateway class, UDP route, TCP route, maybe TLS route. I don't know. This is kind of we'll see. One of the things we want to do is like an early goal for this is we'd like to get it to the point where it's working functional, like fully functional with these APIs, and then plug it in as a gateway API conformance test tool. Use it to build more conformance tests for L4. Part of the purpose of this project isn't just to have fun and to build a load balancer and all this other stuff, but it's also to push the L4 agenda in Gateway API that really hasn't had much of a champion. Basically force this to kind of help us to champion it ourselves. So that's one of the things that'll be cool. And then the other one we want to do is actually plug it directly into the CI. It's agnostic. It doesn't have Nginx or Envoy or anything in it that can make anybody, hopefully, upset. So we would plug it in as a testing tool, and then PRs can, when PRs come in, they would run the conformance for this, which actually can cover a lot, even though it doesn't do L7. It can get reference grants. It can get all kinds of different pieces of like the gateway. And there's quite a bit that it can cover, plus it'll cover the L4 stuff. So that's the goals for now. And then I put here, like, we don't know if it may end there. This is an experiment. It's kind of for funsies. We'll see if it ends up being kind of a reference implementation and a testing tool. That's great. Ultimately, in main right now, there's one thing that we did recently was we did decide that the data plane, which was previously in Cilium's eBPF Go and C, we switched to Rust and Aya because it had there's just kind of missing support features for TC and eBPF Go right now that are pretty well shaped in Rust and Aya. So you'll see that in main, it's very different from what I just demoed. There's a branch here with kind of the demo if you wanted to run it or look through it yourself, but main now has a bunch of Rust code, and we're starting down that direction.
And the plan is to move Blix to K-SIG eventually, right? Yeah.
Yep, that was the next thing I was going to point out. We are in the process of kind of getting this moved into Kubernetes SIGs, one way or another. Right now, I'm just trying to get the whole repo moved over. Otherwise, we're just going to make a repo with it. But it should be just a matter of giving my company a couple of days we should be able to get it moved over into Kubernetes SIGs and then make it kind of our tool for testing and for reference implementation and so forth. So that's that. I put this here because I'm going to shamelessly ask people to star the repo.
Can I add one thing, Shane, too?
Yeah, go for it.
I think, beyond just gateway, I'm really interested in looking like what BPF looks like, truly in upstream, and tackling some of the problems that are going to come with this, with deploying BPF in Kube. Like there's a lot of bigger problems, and Shane and I have kind of been talking about, like, how can we maybe get a working group together to address that? And Nick, maybe you have some great connections, within Cilium. You guys have solved all this, most of it, a lot of my inspiration comes from reading Cilium code, right? And that's awesome. But I think it'd be great to kind of come together as a community and see how we can bring some of that back into core upstream, and so others can use it.
Yeah, making, like, building a better ecosystem behind us, because we ran into so many weird troubles.
Yeah.
We talked about at length at KubeCon, and it would be a wonderful thing we'd like to do. Yeah. Last little bit, we are looking for contributors. There's lots of different things to contribute in this. It's not a high speed, high stakes thing. It's a, for testing and stuff like that. We're doing a meeting tomorrow before the Gamma meeting, which is kind of our first meeting. If you're interested in joining that, or like a future just meeting to talk about it, feel free to PM me or Andrew on, Andrew. PM me or Andrew on Kubernetes Slack, and just let us know, and we'll get you in and talk to you a little bit about like what we're doing. We should have an actual like full-on set of issues and milestones and stuff like that by end of day tomorrow, kind of showing where we had to go, our path to getting it into PRs and Gateway API and stuff like that. So cool. Anything I didn't cover, Andrew?
I don't think so, but Custom has a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Costin.
My typical question: how does it interact with security? MTLS, crypto, and all the other stuff. Is it plain text? Are you going through? I don't know.
It doesn't bother with any of that stuff right now. In theory, it really depends on like what the configuration was, but it could break things like that right now. That's not a fully formed thought at the moment.
I'm not worried about breaking, but do you plan to support some encryption between the workloads and verify identity and all the other stuff that are typically done in a mesh?
Would love to. Currently, like we put in the goals, that's not one of the current goals, and we don't know what the future goals are going to be yet. If you're interested in getting involved and like driving it that direction, we're all for like having you come in and like say, this is something I want to champion in this project to make this work.
And there's a lot of questions about what security means with eBPF, like in a Kube scenario, right? Because if a privileged pod can come in and unload your eBPF program, like how secure is that? So there's stuff we still need to figure out.
That's not really the concern. The concern is if the traffic leaving the pod is encrypted, and how it verifies the peer identity. So someone who's monitoring the link can not man in the middle and other nasty stuff.
To be honest, my suggestion would be that it's better to keep this thing tightly focused on handling the layer 4 equivalent of an ingress controller use case. And we take the lessons that we learn from this and like take them to doing sort of other more like east-west kind of traffic stuff. Like I think that would be my summary of this. Like I think it's best to keep it tightly focused on a north-south scope, and that way this has like a much more clearly defined set of goals. And as Shane said, it will be very useful to have an implementation that's under Kubernetes, like a reference implementation of sorts that is under Kubernetes SIGs that you can run, like that can run the basic tests when you're updating the conformance tests. Because right now, when you update the conformance tests, hopefully your implementation, you are working on the conformance tests at the same time as your implementation. And so you can test that the conformance tests check what you think they do. But right now, if you don't like have an implementation that has implemented the conformance tests, then there is no way for you to test that they actually test what you think they do. So this is going to come up for us very like probably later on in this meeting when we talk about changing the conformance tests for the new status changes, where nobody is going to have done them yet because we haven't made the changes yet. So so that sort of thing is going to come up soon, and having it be that having something to help tighten that loop up and make it a little shorter will be really helpful, I think. Okay. Does anyone else want to contribute any more discussion on Blix?
There were-
It's a really cool demo, by the way.
There was one more question. Yeah, I don't want to take up all the time. We actually
Yeah.
took 25 minutes already. Holy sh. Okay. So, real quick, Bowie, we are trying to commonize or make some things common. I'll talk about that a little bit more today if we have any time. I actually have an agenda item related to that. Mikhail, no, I don't think we're going to go that direction with it. We're not gonna worry about like having a stable endpoint for it. We're just going to kind of service type load balancer and just making that kind of work for us for now. However, open to suggestions later.
Yeah, I think solving the problem of getting the IP visible outside a cluster is very surprisingly difficult. It's probably better to focus this on Kind or Minikube, where you can rely on Docker or whatever to sort of make that problem go away.
Yeah, that's where we're at today. We're using MetalLB actually, but
yeah, like if you have some other tool that you can make that problem go away, that is good, because solving that problem is hard. That's why we don't have TCP route or UDP route support in Cilium yet, is because we have to solve the problem, hopefully without using that sort of stuff, because we've got all the tools. Okay. Thank you very much, guys. That was awesome. Yeah, as you said, 25 minutes, we need to keep moving. I have a couple quick updates. No actions here for anybody. The policy attachment update is coming along. The current document, sorry, let me share my screen again. This one. The current document is here. This is basically a bit of a narrative of what I want to update, that I want to convert into an update PR to the policy attachment, the actual GEP. I've just got a few things here that and Sanjay has been really helping here. Thanks, Sanjay, with like clarifying some things, because he's actually looking at implementing some policy stuff. I think that as people start implementing policy, other people have similar questions. So I want to kind of get this, and it feels like people are starting to talk more about policy now. So I want to get this in reasonably soon. I don't think this is absolutely not a blocker for 060 though. This is just a general sort of BAU kind of thing of trying to tidy up the language around this, and actionable changes to this should definitely go in 070 in my opinion. So that is my update. Does anyone have anything they want to ask, or?
I think I just have a question on what's the call to action for that, Nick? We review
the call to action is have a look at the doc. I'll give it like a couple of days for anyone to have a look at it and add any comments they like. After that, I'm going to work on basically start an update PR for the GEP, and then once I've done that, then everyone's welcome to pile in on there. So if you don't have a chance to review the doc, don't worry too much, because all of the changes that are in there are going to end up in a GEP PR anyway. But if you would like to sort of have a chance to throw stones at me right now, as opposed to throwing bigger stones at me later, then yeah, knock yourself out. I think most of what I got there is pretty reasonable. I think the biggest thing is that I want to make it clear that that there is this larger pattern that we're using of meta resources that like wrap or target other meta resources. And what was the word that we ended up using? Modify or something like that, their behavior. There was a particular word that I needed to pick for folks to be happy with my word choice. I think the key part there is that there's this idea of meta resource that sort of wraps other resources in some way. Policy attachment resources are meta resources, but not all meta resources are policy attachments. So reference grant is also a meta resource. And so I think that it's really important to sort of tighten up the wording around this, so that people, and the important part about policy attachment in my mind is that it's about a hierarchy, and having that policy flow up or down the hierarchy, the settings in that policy sort of default or override the settings in the hierarchy. And so that's the really important part about policy attachment, as opposed to other meta resources. And that's what I want to clarify. So anyway, I don't want to take up very much time with this. It's probably too much already. So yeah, the call to action is have a look at that document, have a read of it, and please comment on there if you have anything. Okay. The other one that I wanted to give a quick update on, because I know people are waiting on it, is the backend capabilities GEP. That one, the current state is that I need to go back and do a change for the actual GEP to sort of make the model clearer. I think that a lot of the questions that we've had around backend capabilities have been around the fact that the explanation of the model in the original GEP was not as clear as it could have been. And so when Candace very kindly went to do an implementation, people had a lot of questions that were sort of actually underlying model questions that we hadn't explained well enough in the GEP. So that one is on me. I don't think that's going to make it into 060. I'm sorry, everyone. Yeah, but I think we need to get 060 out pretty urgently. And so I think that one's going to need to be an 070 thing. Yeah. So yeah, those are two updates of things that are on me. So yeah, sorry if I've not moved them forward faster. The next thing on the agenda is Mike's default group of parent reference. Mike, are you here?
I'm here.
Yep, cool. You want to take it?
Yep. All right, so this is something that John Howard noticed while we were working in kind of like starting to poke at implementation. Now that we landed the first GEP for Gamma focused on using service as a parent graph. We noticed that the spec does not actually define what the default group is for parent reference. This is in contrast to all the other references, backend reference, secret object reference, local object reference, which all specify that when it's unspecified or empty string, the core API group is inferred. The parent reference CRD is currently implemented to set gateway.networking.k8.io as the default, which makes sense in the context of gateway is the only known thing. When service becomes a possibility too, that starts to get weird. It is unclear like how somebody would do that. Hopefully we would kind of avoid inconsistency of like manually setting an empty string and relying on maybe weird language specific behavior. Unfortunately, the thing that might be nice to do of just like change the default to core for that as well would probably break everybody. And there's like maybe split the difference kind of things of like setting different defaults based on kind, but that's potentially a confusing UX. So I'll turn it over to Rob. You have your hand raised. Thoughts?
Yeah, I know we were hoping to leave room for this. So group is a pointer in the parent reference struct, which should make it clear whether something is an empty string or just nil and unspecified. All throughout Kubernetes object references, we have to deal with this empty string means core API group. It's weird, but I think it will work. This is coming from someone who hasn't tried it for a while, but I think it is valid to put an empty string there, and that will come through as you'd expect, but should definitely test that out to make sure. I agree with what you're saying too. Or go ahead.
I'm particularly concerned with any implementation that is not using Go. If empty string equals core may be weird in a Rust implementation or something like that. I know Go structs have special, unset zero values for things.
So
that's so wouldn't defaulting, my guess, and again, this is just a guess, but defaulting should get applied before something reaches the controller code, right? So in that case, you're going to have a very clear definition when it gets to gateway networking K8.io, when it gets to your controller, that is the value. If that default didn't apply somehow, then you know something is wrong, or it is really just empty string. But I think the logic that actually applies that default is written in Go. And so we should be reasonably safe here.
So,
but I'll defer to, go ahead.
Let's let John go.
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure any implementation that has the ability to implement it. My bigger concern would be the user experience of it. Like, how many people are going to write mesh or write service and then forget that they had to put group equals empty string, or look at that and not having any idea what it means? It's probably quite large, right? Like, from a user standpoint, they don't really care what the group of gateway is. They don't care what the group of services. They just care about services and gateways. And for the very rare case when they happen to be dealing with an object that has an ambiguous kind without the group name, then they maybe have to start caring. Now, like because the choices we made, the default is gateway, but in theory, the default could be conditional based on what the kind was, right? Like we know what service means. We know what they mean. We just don't have a way in the API today to actually read what they mean. Does that make sense?
The problem is that anything we do to make this easier for service makes it harder for gateway. Because if we make it so that the default is, aside from adding magic where you look at the kind and then try to guess the group, then then anything we do for the reason we made it the defaulted to gateway.networking is before the gateway use case to make it easier so that you didn't have to include kind.
Right. I'm not saying we should invert the problem, because then we have the exact same problem. It's slightly less confusing maybe because it's not an empty string, but it's really, similar issue. But the magic is I think the best user experience, right?
Yeah, I think that I'm a little reluctant to do magic like that because as much as it is a bit weird, I kind of would prefer that the API be specific about the group. I think that it feels risky to me to be you're basically going to end up with a list of specific kinds that you assume then a group for, which is not, I don't think, it seems reasonable, but the sort of the local the object references require the group for a reason, because it is possible to have you can make another object that is also called that has the kind of service. If the group is distinct, then Kubernetes will let you do that, right? Would it be a bad idea? Absolutely. Can you do it? Definitely. Yeah. And so so that's why the API machinery folks sort of mandate that you have to have a group in this sort of thing. Sorry, Costin, you go.
No, but in practical terms, the problem is that service group is the empty string, no? And it's very difficult for a user to do this.
So that is the decision of API machinery folks. The group for core things is not core, it is empty string. So that means that when you do API version in service, you just have v1, right? Otherwise it would be core/v1, right? So, there's not much we can do to change this, right? That is the group for the core objects is the empty string.
No, but we can be a bit flexible. I agree that someone can create service in group foo/bar, whatever. But if the group is empty in the API, if someone is putting empty, normal behavior is already either service or gateway. So as long as the gateway network in Kubernetes IO doesn't define something called service, which hopefully they will not do, we don't have any ambiguity. And for the user, it's very easy to type because they don't have to type either gateway networking or they need to type quote unquote, which is kind of weird. It's we need to consider how typing this
should. I think we should follow up with I guess it's API machinery maintainers of the core, because it sucks, but it's not sucks just for us. So
basically our option
be a project-wide kind of way, either they're fine, it's empty string and we'll broadcast this, so every single API suffers this, but everyone understands it eventually. Or they say, we say, hey, is this weird? And then kind of have a little caveat there.
We're stuck between a few awful solutions here, and I'll admit that all of them have rough UX, right? We don't have conditional defaulting as an option to us with CRDs today. So we could say, okay, if this is empty, we're going to interpret it differently. But then default is going to apply, or we remove the default entirely from the API, but that requires a version rev and all controllers to update and awful changes all the way down. I don't know that that's backwards compat. I don't know. We could do that with a new API version. Maybe, but you can change defaults on that boundary, but still it's awful. I personally think the least painful thing available to us today is to require users to specify group, but I admit that's still an annoying thing. So I would love to, what Boe was already saying, we should follow up with API machinery and sit and see, hey, can we do conditional defaulting? Can we, I don't know, is there anything else that we can do to make this less painful. But right now, I can't think of a less painful option that's practical.
We can add another field. I mean, it's not impossible to add a service as a field and without the whole group name, whatever. Just
You're right.
I think-
I just think like we should just. The thing is that you should do something that the user is not find surprising, right? And this feels like a fundamental thing that if any API, not just our API inside Kubernetes, has to do this, let's just put it as like an issue, because obviously you're going to be referring sometimes to core. Like, what is garbage collection? Isn't there other policies that use the reference types? Like, do they require
In those ones, they have an explicit call out that an empty string means core. I think we can easily add an explicit call out that there's an empty string means core, but we can't easily change the default right now. And right. I think that's what, and so that means that because we can't change the default without API revs, as Rob mentioned, we can't make it so that you can just, if you don't specify a group in the reference, then it will end up as gateway. So, right. So we can't change that easily. So the choices are, we either assume that if you say gateway.networking and you have a service, you actually mean core, which is not great, but might be okay. Or you just say, hey, you have to do empty string. I kind of would prefer that we say, hey, yes, we know it sucks, it's a bad UX, but you need to do empty string for now while we figure out what's going on with this. This is still an experimental API, right? I agree that this is absolutely an API that a problem that needs to be solved before this goes to prod. But this is an experimental API. I think that having a sharp edge like this is probably okay, because we still need to get, we got to do API review for this, right? If the API review folks call this out in the API review as a thing, then we're like, yes, we have an issue tracking it, but maybe you could help us with API machinery to figure out a better solution. But I don't think it's worth spending a lot of development time on this when there are significant other things that we've got to do to actually make this viable and to get it to a stage where we can send it for API review. So I 100% agree it's an issue, but I don't think it's worth spending too much time on. Sorry, Bo.
Yeah, so I think we should look at the API ecosystem, which is bigger than just this project or this narrow thing, and see, is it well understood? And if other people were successful in making people understand empty string, which admittedly is very confusing, but I mean, if people have been successful, then it's okay, even though it feels weird, maybe in the end it doesn't matter. I think it's probably not quite there, but we definitely shouldn't sort of take a shortcut on our side without doing the general investigation. That's my 2 cents.
Okay. So I think thanks for taking notes on this one, everyone. So I've said what I think. I think that to summarize, I think that this is absolutely a UX issue. It is annoying to have to do this, but I can't see a way to solve this quickly and easily now. So I think that this is we need to kick this can down the road discussion, and see how we go as we this is a let's graduate this thing to beta kind of discussion in my mind, rather than we need to worry about this in the alpha phase. Yes, it sucks, 100% agree, but this is a blocker for beta rather than a blocker for alpha in my mind. Does anyone else have thoughts here? I mean, obviously, I know you probably disagree, Mike and John.
No, I actually do agree. Okay. I mean, this is not the end of the world here, but it's something that we should consider. Yeah.
No, I think the stopgap of just adding an explicit note in the docs of how to set the core group for parent reference seems fine for alpha.
Okay, cool.
Do we know it works if you put quote unquote it will work, to be treated as default value and lost in the translation?
I want to say I tested that when we were making the types, but man, it's been a while. So I need to verify before we go all in.
So there's only 2 options. It's a pointer field, in which case the default is nil, and setting to empty string is setting a different value than nil. So it will work. The second case is it is not a pointer field, in which case the 0 value is the empty string, but that 0 value, if not specified, will be overwritten by the default. So specifying an empty string value should still work because you're specifying the 0 value. Specifying the empty string in the YAML is how you specify the 0 value, in the same way that specifying a 0 for an int specifies the 0 value for an int.
Okay.
So it should work regardless. Okay, so yeah, no worries. So yeah, do we have anything more we want to say there? Okay, cool. I'm conscious we are running low on time, and I did want to get to some of the triage today if we could manage it. There are a couple of issues here for no matching listener port. I think I had a bit of a look at these. Sorry, you want to go, Rob?
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah, I also did some pre-triage on this one. I think all we need, this doesn't need a gap, in my opinion. It's just a new reason. It makes sense. Anyone who wants to can follow up, but I don't mind commenting too.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I put that on the docs and forgot I had put that on there, but yeah.
Yep. I think yeah, this one just needs like a small PR to add a reason that covers these things, that covers it, and then preferably when we add reasons like that, we should also add conformance tests to exercise them. So I will see if discussion there is an issue for it. So I think that issue, I'll just note in there that it should also include a conformance test to check that the reason works. If someone can get to that before we release 060, then I would be fine to include that in 060. I will add this issue into 060 for now, but with the but I would say to everyone that one's nice to have, not a blocker. So if we finish everything else and that's the last thing and no one's working on it, then I would say we'll probably kick it out of the milestone into 070. Sound okay, folks?
Yep.
Yeah, that's fine. I'd say it's a real stretch to get in, but I don't, if the work is in, I'm fine too.
Yeah, if someone really feels strongly about it and they would like to get it into 060, then you have at it. Okay. Yeah, let's talk, speaking of, let's talk 060 milestone. So there's a little bit left here. The conditions and status update one that's on me basically is mostly kind of done. The outstanding things are the programmed gateway condition PR that Lucas has been working on. I think that one is pretty close, but just needs some more conformance tests. I'm pretty sure that there are that a lot of the API currently uses the ready condition in the conformance test to signal that the conformance test should be run. All of that tooling needs to be moved to programmed as part of this change. So that's probably the thing that is the most work that's outstanding in my mind. Does anyone else have thoughts here?
Yeah, I'd agree. I really want to highlight the first one in that list, the conformance test that is incorrect. We don't have anyone working on that right now.
Yes.
That needs to be prioritized. I think the other items in the list, specifically the net new conformance test we want to add, is not a blocker. Like we have said in our versioning guidelines, we can add new conformance tests in patch releases, and as long as they describe behavior that's already in the spec, we can add those at a later point. The big concern is that we should not release with a completely broken conformance test. And that's what we have right now with the response header modifier. If anyone feels like they have time in the next week to work on this, that would be really helpful. I think that's one of the biggest things we have sitting between us and a meaningful release. This list is getting pretty small, and keep in mind that some of these things are not blockers. So this is really the only blocker that's left that is not assigned, that we don't have someone working on.
So yes, this one is not assigned, but I think the other blocker is the programmed changes. That's the other blocker. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone else have anything they want to say about 060 release? Hopefully that should have answered some questions that I saw in the chat.
If no one wants to take that one, I could take a look at that one.
That'd be great, Sanjay.
That'd be
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, Contour, we want to release with 060, so whatever we can do to help.
Yeah, that's awesome. My own personal goal for this is I would love to enter API review next week. So this week is OSS code freeze and upstream, so we're not going to get any attention. But next week I would really love to have things in place. That means especially status, getting that in place.
Yeah, that program needs to be done this week then. Yeah.
And then if we can at least get that first round of API review done, we don't have massive changes in this release, but I really want to make sure we're as ready as we can be next release, because I know Contour is probably not the only implementation that would really love to see this release get out the door.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We keep finding things that are like, oh no, we got to fix this. Especially like a lot of this is on me for trying to fix the status. That has created a lot of churn in the API. Like I said before, we would have had to break it at some point. I'd rather do it now, but it's meant that it's taken us longer than I would have hoped to get this done.
Yep.
Okay. Let's clean up first. Okay, Shane.
Yeah, I'll make it really quick. So part of the Bleaks project, we created what I'm hoping or thinking might become the official Gateway API bindings library for Rust. It's at that link, shameless plug to go star the repository. It's an automated build, so even if you don't know Rust, like the whole system is using Copium should be capable of actually being automated. What I'd like to do is have that automatically build, keep it in tag parallelization with the Go library, and then ultimately contribute this to Kubernetes SIGs. I am aware of, Mike put in there that Linkerd has done something kind of similar. I don't think they automate their builds. They do something different. And I have already reached out to Buoyant to see if they're interested in like switching to this. So just something, food for thought. If you're using Rust and want to talk Gateway API, we might host a library for that for you. So
Awesome. Thanks, Shane. Yeah, please contact Shane with any more. Travis, do you want to talk through this one?
Sorry, we got down this far. So Robin raised the question basically. So we have two options for validating that you don't try to make the header filters do things that are a bit confusing. One way to do this is that you just make it so they only do one action. And we can do this either with a validation webhook or kind of a hybrid between a validation webhook and the controller. So the current proposed version here is just the validation webhook. Which means if you're not running the validation webhook, then you can have mixed, like multiple actions get to the controller, and it'll kind of just be undefined behavior what the controller does from there. You could also implement it as something in conformance tests where the controller actually does have to take that, and if it does see it, assign a status and reject the route. My kind of position on this is, at least briefly in the past, I'd heard that like basically we kind of just want to consider the validation admission webhook as a required portion of the environment, so that if you're not really running on it, you can expect to see undefined behavior. And I kind of like that because it's one less thing for implementations to deal with. This is something that we can very much easily say from the resource alone that you just you shouldn't accept this. It doesn't really have to rely on anything else that the implementation may know about its internals. It's very clear and apparent from the resource alone that the configuration is incorrect. And secondly, that I don't know, I feel kind of like wonky around having the mixed config where it's like sometimes the failure will happen this way if you're running the webhook. Sometimes it'll happen the other way. And then kind of like the additional weird thing where if you have two of the same action, then it violates the schema. So it's kind of like a webhook, but not if you don't have the webhook in place.
Yeah.
I feel like the consequences here aren't that bad if we let it through, but
so this is a bit of a rabbit hole for me. I agree with basically everything that's been said, that yes, we should broadly assume that the webhook is everywhere and it's better for UX and everything like that. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize that there will be some point where our controller runs where the webhook is not present. And we need to do something when this gets through, right? When this validation just is not present, what do we do? We can leave that unspecified and leave that completely up to implementations because, well, I mean, we don't expect that to be a common case. Or we can provide some kind of either recommendation, guidance, or requirement even for what they do. I think requirement's too strong, but something like along the lines of, if this validation isn't here, if it gets to you, this is what you should do. So far, we haven't done that anywhere in the API. We've basically just left it wide open. And we do have some, in our implementation guidelines, we clearly state that the validation webhook is UX. It's not something that the controller can rely on. But at the same time, like, we don't say what to do in these cases. And I imagine it will take some thought for every implementer that comes along this and says, well, okay, I know the webhook is going to prevent this, but if it doesn't, I have to have some code somewhere to do something. Everyone can kind of go their own way, and maybe that's fine. I don't know, or we can just suggest something here. That's, yeah.
So, yeah, I agree with Rob that it's possible that people will not be running the webhook. I think, Travis, you probably got that idea about from me. I have certainly always planned that the webhook should be required for your implementation to be conformant. If you are not running the webhook, then your Gateway API install is not conformant. It cannot be conformant to any level. And so in my mind, one of the things that I've had on my to-do list for ages is that I would actually like us to have a conformance test suite that tests that the webhook is present, or that something else is providing that functionality. So there should be conformance tests that say, if you try and put two of the same filter in, that gets rejected. And if it doesn't get rejected, then your Gateway API install is not conformant, right? Like, and so it's not necessarily that you have to run our webhook, is that you have to have the same behavior, like and that way we're kind of black box testing that. I think that, sorry.
I was just gonna say I'm generally in favor of that. If we don't have an issue for that, we should capture that real quick so we don't lose that thought.
Yeah, okay. I'll take a note. So yeah, I think that Rob is 100% right. We can't, as an implementer, you can't rely 100% on the fact that it's running. But I think that us providing the guidance that, hey, it is possible for the webhook to not be running. It is possible for someone you can kubectl apply force and it will go and it will bypass the webhook, right? Like, is that a great idea? No, it's terrible. And but like, you can do it. And so like we should just have a thing that says, hey, you need to do two things. One, don't crash, right? Like, you need to have case statements that have defaults or something like that just have things that say, hey, you try to do something that I can't do, that I can't handle. I personally think that it's fine for the guidance here to be, if you get something that the webhook should catch and doesn't, you should throw out the whole record. You should dump the whole object on the ground and be like, this one doesn't work, log it, or something like that. And if they don't like the fact that the status, that you don't get a status update, well, we run the webhook, right? Like, I don't think that we should waste too much time looking after people who are not going to do the things that we tell you to do. If you want to go and not run the webhook, shit's going to get weird, right? Like, that's not on us, right? Like, we told you to run the webhook, and so like, I think that, providing some guidance that says just drop the object and don't process it, feels like the right guidance to give. And because we don't want to, look, it's a really mean way to say it, but we don't want to be kind to people who aren't going to read the instructions, right? Like, there's an extent to which we can't look after them too much.
I guess one of the questions on mine, it was like, so what are the situations where we would expect people not to run the webhook? I guess it's maybe a bit unclear whether we kind of expect the webhook to be running as a standalone application deployed on its own, or if we expect that it's, at least if you're a Go-based controller, that you just integrate the code and run it separately as your own server. If you're not, then you write your own implementation of the spec. I would my initial thought was maybe just like it would be a standalone application, but maybe that assumption was wrong.
Yeah, so we supply the webhook as a standalone application today.
Okay.
And so that's why I think that having the conformance test that tests that you're blocking the stuff that the current webhook does means that, we're like, hey, we give you a thing that you can just run and have it do it. If you want to do it something else, then you need to, that's on you, right? Like, if you want to do something else, that's cool. But the important part is that the stuff that gets blocked by the webhook we supply gets blocked. And after that, shrug.
Yeah. Typically, the use case in people who wouldn't run the webhook is because they are concerned about extra applications they need to maintain with high privileges, because any webhook is super privileged and other things. So I completely agree. We should just drop the object with the same validations that webhook is doing, because it's effectively the same thing. Ignore it.
Yeah, I would point out that the webhook code is written in such a way that it's pretty easy to import into your controller and run the same set of validations. And if you hit a resource that fails those validations, dropping it on the floor does seem like a pretty reasonable middle ground here.
Actually, that's a very good point. I mean, if it's Go code, probably just linking the code and just running the exact same validations that the webhook is doing in all controllers, or implementation would be ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so again, like the key part is that the I mean, I think the key, I think that the webhook validation conformance test that I was talking about would probably expect that the API server does not accept invalid YAML, so that there's no invalid YAML inside the API, like stored in Kubernetes. So that would mean that if you wanted to run your own thing, you're going to need to approximate the functionality of a webhook. So I don't, like, you're going to have to run your own webhook basically. But it's like, if you don't trust us to run the webhook, then sure, whatever. But like, I kind of be like, if you don't trust us to run the webhook, then why are you trusting us to write the API, right? Like, yeah, like I think that yeah, like I said, it's probably not worth spending too much time on.
To be clear, I mean, you can run implementation of Gateway API with very minimal privileges. I mean, you just have a namespace and some RBAC that. But if you deploy the webhook, that gives you almost full control over the entire thing, because webhook can do a lot of. If you can create a mutating webhook and create all the other stuff, you can easily kind of take over the cluster. So it's a slight difference, but I agree. I mean, it should be installed by default in Kubernetes.
I feel like the webhook, it operates on the same level as installing CRDs, which both a highly privileged thing that, at least, from the perspective of a cloud provider, that's something that, your cluster operator, infrastructure provider can manage for you. But yeah, we are past time, so I'll stop.
We are past. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we have big problems in Cilium with handling webhooks, because if we need to use them, but we're the one that sets up the network so you can use them, like dependency circles, ahoy. So anyway, yes, we are at time. We didn't get to triage, sadly. I was hopeful when I saw the initial thing, but you all did a great job of adding things for us to discuss. Thank you for making a engaging meeting. Anyone who wants to stay around a little bit for triage, I could probably stay around for a bit to do a little bit of triage. I think it would be good to talk a little bit about some of these issues. Yeah, we can stop the recording or leave it running, up to you. But yeah, that is the official end of the meeting. Thank you all for your contributions.
Yeah, I'm great. I'll stick around. I have a few triage things to do, but I agree. We can stop the recording, and that's the end of official meeting time. And no pressure to stick around, because triage is never that exciting, but
Yes, thank you, everybody. Okay, recording stopping now.